The wind whistled through the maple trees lining Cedar Grove Street, carrying autumn's first chill. 4-year-old Tommy Mitchell stood frozen at his bedroom window, his small finger pressed against the glass, pointing at something across the street. His father, James, watched with growing concern as tears streamed down his son's flushed cheeks. "What is it, buddy?" James knelt beside him, following Tommy's unwavering gaze to their neighbor's trash can. The black container stood innocuous against the backdrop of Mrs. Henderson's well-maintained garden, yet Tommy's shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Bad," Tommy whispered, his voice trembling. "Bad there, Daddy." James ran his fingers through his son's sandy blonde hair, noting how Tommy's skin felt clammy to the touch. This wasn't the first time his son had fixated on that particular spot. For 3 days straight, Tommy had woken up in the pre-dawn hours, padding to the window in his dinosaur pajamas, pointing and crying. Sarah, James's wife, appeared in the doorway, her nurse's scrubs already on for her early morning shift at Memorial Hospital. The shadows under her eyes spoke of another restless night spent listening to their son's distress. "Maybe we should check it out," she suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never seen him like this before." James hesitated, his law enforcement training making him acutely aware of how many missing person cases started with seemingly innocent observations. Tommy had always been sensitive. He cried when he saw injured birds, insisted on helping earthworms back to the grass after rain, and once spent an entire afternoon talking to a butterfly that had landed on their porch railing. But this was different. The intensity in his young eyes carried a weight that made James's chest tighten. The morning light was just beginning to paint the sky in watercolor hues of pink and gold when James finally made his decision. He squeezed Sarah's hand, grabbed his jacket from the hook by the front door, and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The concrete was cold beneath his feet, even through his shoes, and his breath formed small clouds in front of his face as he approached Mrs. Henderson's property. His heart thundered in his chest as he reached for the lid of the trash can. The metal handle was ice cold against his palm, and for a moment he almost turned back. But Tommy's tear-stained face flashed in his mind, and with a deep breath, he lifted the lid. The sound that escaped his throat was primal, a mixture of horror and disbelief. There, nestled among discarded newspapers and empty food containers, was a tiny bundle wrapped in a pale blue blanket. As James reached in with trembling hands, he could see movement, subtle but unmistakable. The blanket shifted, revealing a perfect miniature face, lips tinged with blue from the cold. "Sarah!" The scream tore from his throat as he cradled the infant against his chest, already running back across the street. "Sarah!" His wife appeared at the door, her professional calm evaporating the instant she saw what he carried. "Oh my God," she breathed, immediately switching into emergency mode. "Get him inside. Now!" They laid the baby on their kitchen table, Sarah's trained hands moving with practiced efficiency as she assessed the situation. The infant was newborn, probably no more than a day or two old, his skin cold and mottled. Tommy stood in the doorway, his tears finally stopped, watching with solemn understanding far beyond his years. "He's hypothermic, but he's breathing," Sarah announced, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Call 911. Now!" As James fumbled with his phone, Sarah wrapped the baby in warm blankets from their dryer, gently rubbing his tiny limbs to stimulate circulation. The infant's weak cries grew stronger with each passing minute, filling the kitchen with a sound that was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Tommy approached cautiously, his small hand reaching out to touch the baby's blanket. "Safe now," he whispered, nodding to himself. "Safe now." The wail of approaching sirens cut through the morning quiet, and within minutes, their kitchen was filled with emergency personnel. The paramedics worked quickly, setting up a portable warming system and checking the baby's vital signs. Sarah refused to leave the infant's side, her nursing credentials allowing her to stay involved in his care. As they prepared to transport the baby to the hospital, one of the paramedics turned to James. "If you hadn't found him when you did..." She left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. James looked at Tommy, who had retreated to a corner of the kitchen but maintained his vigilant watch over the proceedings. "It wasn't me," James said quietly. "It was my son. He knew. The morning dissolved into a blur of police statements and hospital visits. Sarah took an emergency personal day from work, accompanying the baby to the hospital while James stayed home with Tommy. Detective Marcus Chun, an old friend from the police academy, arrived to take their statement, his face grim as he documented the details. "The blanket might be our best lead," Marcus noted, carefully bagging it as evidence. "It's got some unique embroidery work. Looks custom-made." James nodded, his mind already racing through possibilities. In his 15 years on the force, he'd seen cases of abandoned babies before, but something about this felt different. The careful way the infant had been wrapped, the choice of location. It spoke of desperation rather than callousness. As the day progressed, Tommy finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling asleep on the living room couch. James covered him with a blanket, marveling at his son's inexplicable connection to what had happened. The phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. It was Sarah. "The baby's going to make it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He's responding well to treatment." "But James, there's something else. He has a mark on his wrist, some kind of symbol. The doctors think it might be important." James felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the autumn weather. "What kind of symbol?" "It looks like a butterfly, but different. Stylized. The doctors are photographing it for evidence, but there's something else. I can't explain it, but I feel connected to him, like we were meant to find him." James looked at Tommy, sleeping peacefully now that his mission was accomplished. "Maybe we were," he replied softly. As the sun began to set on that extraordinary day, James couldn't shake the feeling that their lives had shifted irreversibly. He didn't know then that the butterfly mark would lead them down a path of discovery that would uncover a network of human trafficking, or that the baby, whom they would later name Michael, after Sarah's father, would become an integral part of their family. He couldn't have known that Tommy's inexplicable awareness would later be attributed to what doctors called heightened empathic sensitivity, or that this event would inspire Sarah to start a foundation for abandoned children that would save countless lives. The story was just beginning, its threads weaving together in ways none of them could have predicted. As James sat in the growing darkness, listening to Tommy's steady breathing and waiting for Sarah to return from the hospital, he felt a profound sense of purpose settling over him. Sometimes, he realized, the most important moments in life come disguised as ordinary days, and the most powerful acts of love begin with simply paying attention to a child's tears. The days that followed blurred together in a whirlwind of police interviews and hospital visits. Detective Chen's investigation gained momentum when the blanket's distinctive embroidery led them to Sweet Dreams Baby Boutique, a small shop in the affluent part of town. The owner, Eleanor Wright, immediately recognized the Han. "Dye work." "Oh yes, those blankets were a special order," she said, pulling up records on her computer. "A man bought 24 of them about 6 months ago. Paid cash, but I remember him because he was so particular about the butterfly design." The security footage revealed a black SUV with tinted windows, and though the license plate was obscured, a distinctive dent in the rear quarter panel gave investigators their first solid lead. James found himself drawn deeper into the case, his paternal instinct fueling a determination that went beyond professional duty. Meanwhile, at home, Tommy developed an almost mystical bond with baby Michael during hospital visits. He would sit for hours by the incubator, singing softly, songs no one had taught him, lullabies that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his soul. The nurses noticed that Michael's vital signs stabilized whenever Tommy was near. Sarah threw herself into Michael's care with the same intensity she brought to all her cases, but there was something different this time. She would catch herself watching him sleep, counting his tiny fingers and toes, memorizing the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. The butterfly mark on his wrist became a source of both fear and fascination, a delicate purple design that seemed to shimmer under certain lights. The breakthrough came 3 weeks after Michael's discovery. Detective Chen's team traced the SUV to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The building, once a textile factory, stood like a hulking shadow against the sky. Inside, they found evidence of a sophisticated trafficking operation: forged documents, medical supplies, and most disturbingly, a nursery filled with empty cribs. Among the documents was a notebook filled with codes and dates. Forensics revealed that the butterfly mark was a brand used by the traffickers to identify premium merchandise, babies destined for wealthy buyers overseas. The discovery made James physically ill, but it also provided the key to unraveling the entire network. The investigation revealed a web of corruption that stretched from local hospitals to international adoption agencies. At the center was a woman named Sophia Kovac, whose own tragic story gradually came to light. She had been trafficking's victim herself, forced to work as a midwife for the organization. When Michael was born to a young mother named Grace Chun, no relation to the detective, Sophia had made a desperate choice. Grace had died in childbirth, but not before begging Sophia to save her son. Sophia, seeing in Grace's eyes the same desperation she had once known, decided to act. She wrapped Michael in one of the organization's distinctive blankets and left him where she knew he would be found. Not in front of a hospital or fire station where the traffickers might be watching, but in a quiet suburban neighborhood where a child's pure intuition would guide him to safety. As winter settled over the city, the case began making headlines. James and Sarah found themselves at the center of a media storm, but their focus remained on Michael. The adoption process, expedited due to the circumstances, moved forward with surprising speed. Tommy seemed to understand the gravity of the situation in his own way, proudly telling anyone who would listen about his new baby brother. The Mitchell home transformed gradually. A crib appeared in the spare room, stuffed animals accumulated in corners, and the sounds of Michael's laughter began to fill the spaces that had once seemed empty. Sarah took extended leave from the hospital, channeling her medical expertise into creating a foundation for trafficking survivors. She named it Butterfly's Wings, turning the trafficker's symbol of ownership into a message of hope and transformation. James's perspective on law enforcement shifted. He transferred to a special task force focused on child trafficking, working to prevent other families from being torn apart. The network they uncovered led to dozens of arrests and the rescue of 17 other infants. Each case filled him with a mixture of rage and determination, but he always came home to the reminder of why he fought: his own children, safe and loved. Tommy's gift, as they came to call it, didn't fade. He remained unusually attuned to others' suffering, often knowing when Michael needed comfort before the baby even began to cry. Child psychologists studied him, amazed by his emotional intelligence, but Tommy couldn't explain it. "I just know," he would say, shrugging his small shoulders. Sophia was eventually found in a safe house in Canada. Rather than face charges, she became a key witness, her testimony crucial in dismantling the trafficking ring. When she met the Mitchells, her hands trembled as she touched Michael's cheek. "I knew," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I knew when I saw your house, saw your little boy in the window. I knew he would be safe here." The butterfly mark on Michael's wrist faded over time, becoming a pale scar that told a story of survival. Sarah and James decided they would tell him the truth when he was old enough to understand. About Grace's sacrifice, Sophia's courage, and Tommy's inexplicable connection that had saved his life. Years passed, and the Mitchell family grew stronger. Tommy and Michael shared a bond that went beyond brotherhood, a connection forged in that pre-dawn moment when a child's tears alerted the world to a baby's silent cry for help. Sarah's foundation expanded, offering support to families affected by trafficking, while James's task force became a model for departments across the country. On Michael's 5th birthday, as the family gathered in their backyard under strings of twinkling lights, Tommy presented his brother with a drawing. In crayon strokes and glitter, he had recreated the butterfly mark, but transformed it into something beautiful: wings spreading wide, breaking free from chains, soaring toward the sun. Sarah hung the drawing in the foundation's office, where it became a symbol of their mission. Visitors would often ask about it, and she would tell them the story, not just of how they found Michael, but of how love and intuition could pierce the darkest nights, how a child's persistence could unravel evil, and how family could be forged in the most unexpected moments. The Mitchell home became a sanctuary for other survivors, a place where healing began with simple acts of kindness. Tommy grew into his role as protector, his childhood sensitivity developing into a deep empathy that drew others to him. Michael thrived, showing no traces of his traumatic beginning except in his extraordinary capacity for compassion. And on quiet evenings, when the house was still, Sarah and James would often find their sons in the backyard. Tommy pointing out constellations to Michael, teaching him to find light in the darkness, just as he had done on that fateful morning years ago. The butterfly mark may have faded, but its legacy lived on in their unshakable bond, in their family's mission, and in the countless lives they touched through their journey of healing and hope. In the garden that evening, watching his sons trace imaginary constellations in the darkening sky, James felt a profound sense of how their lives had become intertwined with something larger than themselves. The butterfly's wings foundation had grown beyond their wildest expectations, becoming a beacon of hope for families across the country. Their modest suburban home had transformed into an unofficial sanctuary, its doors always open to those seeking refuge from similar circumstances. Tommy, now entering his teenage years, had developed an uncanny ability to connect with traumatized children. Social workers often called upon him to help comfort newly rescued kids, amazed at how his gentle presence could calm even the most distressed child. His childhood sensitivity had evolved into a remarkable emotional intelligence that drew people to him like moths to a flame. The butterfly mark on Michael's wrist had indeed faded to a silvery scar, but its significance in their lives only grew stronger. Sarah had incorporated the symbol into her medical practice, specializing in treating survivors of trafficking. Her patients often spoke of how the butterfly imagery helped them reclaim their own stories, transforming a mark of ownership into a symbol of liberation. Detective Chen's investigation had snowballed into an international operation, exposing trafficking rings across 3 continents. The evidence they gathered from that first warehouse led to the rescue of hundreds of children, each case adding another layer to their understanding of the network's complexity. Sophia's testimony proved invaluable, her intimate knowledge of the organization helping authorities stay one step ahead of the traffickers' evolving tactics. The Mitchell story became a case study in law enforcement training programs, highlighting the importance of listening to children's intuition. Tommy's role in Michael's rescue inspired a new protocol for handling cases involving young witnesses, acknowledging that sometimes the most crucial information came from the most unexpected sources. Michael grew into a thoughtful, creative child with an old soul's wisdom. His early trauma left no visible scars except in his extraordinary capacity for empathy. He showed a particular talent for art, filling sketchbooks with intricate butterfly designs that seemed to capture both fragility and strength. His art teacher remarked that his drawings had a healing quality to them, as if each stroke of his pencil was mending something broken in the world. Sarah's medical research into early childhood trauma led to groundbreaking findings about resilience and recovery. She discovered that children like Michael, rescued and placed in loving homes during their earliest days, showed remarkable adaptability. Her work challenged existing theories about permanent damage from early trauma, offering hope to countless families. The Foundation's reach extended beyond direct intervention in trafficking cases. They established scholarship programs for survivors, therapy groups for families, and training workshops for law enforcement. Tommy often spoke at these events, his simple story of watching from a window becoming a powerful testimony to the importance of trusting one's instincts. During one particularly moving Foundation event, an elderly woman approached the family. She introduced herself as Grace Chen's grandmother, having recognized Michael from news coverage. She brought with her a small box of mementos, photographs, letters, and a hand-knitted baby blanket that Grace had made during her pregnancy. The meeting filled in crucial pieces of their story, helping Michael understand the courage that had marked his entry into the world. The butterfly theme wove itself through every aspect of their lives. The garden Sarah planted bloomed with butterfly-attracting flowers, creating a living memorial to transformation and hope. Local artists donated butterfly sculptures to the Foundation, each one telling a different story of survival and renewal. The symbol that had once marked children for sale now marked them for salvation. As Michael approached his 10th birthday, The family decided to honor Grace's memory by establishing a maternal health clinic in her name. The Grace Chin Memorial Clinic would serve vulnerable mothers, providing not just medical care, but also protection from trafficking networks. Sophia, now working as an advocate for survivors, helped design the clinic's security protocols. Tommy's gift for healing continued to evolve in unexpected ways. He began studying psychology, determined to understand the science behind his intuitive abilities. His research into childhood trauma and emotional intelligence attracted attention from leading institutions, opening new avenues for understanding how children process and respond to others' pain. The warehouse where Michael had been held was eventually demolished, but not before the Mitchells organized a ceremony of transformation. Survivors and their families gathered to paint butterfly murals on its walls, their colorful wings a testament to freedom and resilience. When the building came down, pieces of the painted walls were preserved and incorporated into monuments at healing centers across the country. James's work with the task force led to the development of new technologies for tracking trafficking networks. He never forgot the feeling of lifting that trash can lid, of finding Michael among the discarded newspapers. That memory drove him to search darker corners, to look where others might not think to look, always believing that rescue was possible. The story of the Mitchell family became interwoven with hundreds of other stories, each one adding new dimensions to their understanding of love, courage, and healing. Their home remained a gathering place for survivors and their families, a place where transformation wasn't just possible, but expected, where butterflies weren't just symbols but promises kept. On summer evenings, when the garden filled with actual butterflies drawn to Sarah's flowers, the family would often sit together, watching nature's display of transformation. Michael would sketch, Tommy would tell stories to visiting children, and Sarah and James would hold hands, marveling at how one moment of attention to a child's distress had rippled outward to touch so many lives. The butterfly mark that had once branded Michael for sale had instead marked him for a different destiny, one of healing, hope, and the kind of love that transforms not just individuals but entire communities. In their family's story, tragedy had become triumph, darkness had given way to light, and the simple trust of a child had grown into a movement that continued to spread its wings, touching lives far beyond their quiet suburban street. As butterflies danced through their garden in the fading light, the Mitchell story continued to unfold in ways that touched lives far beyond their neighborhood. The ripple effects of that cold autumn morning had grown into waves of change, transforming not just their family, but entire communities. Michael's artistic talents blossomed into a full-fledged career as he entered his teenage years. His butterfly-inspired artwork began appearing in galleries across the country, each piece telling a story of transformation. He developed a unique technique that incorporated hidden symbols within his paintings, subtle butterfly marks that spoke to survivors without revealing their stories to casual observers. His exhibitions became gathering places for the healing community, spaces where silence could speak and scars could shine. Tommy's path led him deeper into the field of trauma psychology. His research into childhood intuition and emotional intelligence revolutionized how experts understood early trauma detection. He developed a groundbreaking therapy program that combined traditional counseling with what he called intuitive listening, teaching caregivers to recognize and trust the subtle signs children often showed when others were in danger. Sarah's medical practice evolved into a comprehensive healing center that integrated physical care with emotional and spiritual support. The Grace Chin Memorial Clinic expanded to multiple locations, each facility designed with butterfly gardens and art therapy spaces. She pioneered a treatment approach that recognized the body's capacity to transform trauma into strength, just as a butterfly emerges stronger from its chrysalis. James's work with law enforcement took an unexpected turn when he discovered patterns in trafficking networks that mimicked butterfly migration routes. This insight led to the development of predictive models that helped authorities anticipate and prevent trafficking operations before they could take root. His methodology became known as the butterfly effect protocol, acknowledging how small interventions could create massive positive changes in the fight against human trafficking. The Butterfly's Wings Foundation grew into an international organization with branches in countries across the globe. Each location maintained the intimate, family-centered approach that had marked its beginnings in the Mitchells' home. The Foundation Scholarship Program, named after Sofia Kovac, helps survivors pursue education and career opportunities, transforming their experiences into tools for helping others. Sofia herself became a powerful voice for change, testifying before international tribunals and advising governments on anti-trafficking policies. She never forgot the night she had left Michael in that trash can, knowing somehow that Tommy would sense his presence. Her testimony always began with that story, a moment of desperate faith in a child's capacity to see what adults might miss. The butterfly mark that had once branded children for sale became a symbol of hope recognized worldwide. Survivors began getting butterfly tattoos over their trafficking scars, reclaiming their bodies and their stories. Artists collaborated with Michael to create public installations that honored survivors while educating communities about trafficking's reality and prevention. Grace Chen's story, too, found its place in the larger narrative. Her grandmother became a regular presence at Foundation events, sharing stories of Grace's dreams for her unborn child. These stories helped other families understand the complex circumstances that sometimes led to desperate choices, fostering compassion alongside justice. The Mitchells' home remained a sanctuary, its doors open to those seeking refuge and hope. The garden Tommy and Michael had once used as their stargazing spot became a gathering place for healing circles, where survivors shared their stories under the open sky. Butterfly bushes lined the pathways, their flowers attracting both insects and metaphors for transformation. As Michael grew older, he began to understand his role in a larger story of healing and hope. His art evolved to include interactive installations where visitors could add their own butterfly marks, creating collective works that spoke to the power of community in healing. His childhood trauma transformed into a source of creative energy that helped others find beauty in their own scars. Tommy's intuitive gifts matured into a profound understanding of human connection. He could often sense when someone needed support before they themselves realized it, a skill that made him invaluable in crisis intervention. His childhood experience of knowing something was wrong became the foundation for training others to trust their instincts when confronting potential trafficking situations. The warehouse site where Michael had been held was transformed into a memorial garden, its paths lined with butterfly sculptures created by survivors. Each year, on the anniversary of Michael's rescue, the community gathered there for a ceremony of remembrance and hope. Butterflies released during these ceremonies seemed to dance with particular purpose, as if carrying messages between past and present. Sarah's research into trauma and resilience continued to break new ground. She discovered that survivors often developed extraordinary capacities for healing others, their wounds becoming windows through which they could see and understand others' pain. This finding led to new therapeutic approaches that recognized trauma survivors not as victims, but as potential healers. James's work with the task force expanded to include training programs for community members, teaching them to recognize signs of trafficking and trust their instincts about suspicious situations. He never tired of telling Michael's story of how a child's ears had cracked open a case that seemed invisible to adult eyes. The butterfly mark that had once symbolized ownership became a badge of survival, then of triumph, and finally of transformation. In art galleries, hospitals, police stations, and community centers around the world, butterfly symbols appeared as quiet reminders that healing was possible, that dark marks could become beautiful scars, and that the most profound changes often began with the simplest acts of attention. The butterfly symbols that dotted the global landscape became more than mere markers of survival. They evolved into beacons of active change. Communities worldwide began adopting the butterfly effect protocol, creating networks of vigilant citizens trained to recognize and respond to signs of trafficking. The movement that had started with a child's tears in a suburban window had grown into a worldwide web of protection and hope. Michael's artistic influence reached new heights as he entered his 20s. His work began incorporating augmented reality elements, allowing viewers to scan his butterfly paintings with their phones to access resources for trafficking prevention and survivor support. Each piece became a portal to healing, connecting viewers directly to local support services and educational materials. Museums around the world competed to host his installations, not just for their artistic merit, but for their power to transform communities. Tommy's research into childhood intuition led to groundbreaking discoveries about the nature of human connection. He identified what he called empathic resonance patterns, measurable changes in brain activity that occurred when children sensed others in distress. This work revolutionized both psychology and law enforcement, leading to new protocols for interviewing child witnesses and assessing potential trafficking situations. His findings suggested that children's intuitive abilities, far from being mysterious or supernatural, were actually sophisticated pattern recognition systems that adults had learned to suppress. Sarah's medical practice expanded into genetic research, exploring how trauma could leave physical markers that might be transformed through targeted intervention. Her work with epigenetics revealed that the butterfly mark carried by trafficking victims might have activated dormant genetic patterns related to resilience and healing. This discovery led to new therapeutic approaches that combined physical healing with psychological transformation. The Grace Chin Memorial Clinic network grew to include specialized research facilities studying the intersection of trauma, genetics, and healing. Grace's grandmother's stories about her family's history of intuitive abilities added another layer to their understanding of how Tommy had known to watch that window. The research suggested that intuition might run in families, passed down through generations like an invisible inheritance of protection. James's work with law enforcement evolved into an international consulting practice, teaching police forces worldwide how to integrate community awareness with technical surveillance. He developed training programs that helped officers recognize the subtle patterns of trafficking operations while building stronger connections with the communities they served. His approach, combining high-tech tools with human intuition, became known as the Mitchell Method and was adopted by law enforcement agencies across the globe. The Butterfly's Wings Foundation established sister organizations in countries throughout Asia, Europe, and Africa, each adapting the Mitchell family's approach to local cultural contexts. These centers became hubs of healing and transformation, where survivors could find not just safety but purpose. Many went on to become advocates and healers themselves, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of recovery and empowerment. Sophia's testimony before international tribunals led to sweeping changes in global anti-trafficking laws. Her story of leaving Michael, where she knew he would be found, became a powerful argument for understanding trafficking as a complex human issue requiring nuanced solutions. She worked closely with the Mitchells to develop training programs for law enforcement and social services, teaching them to look beyond simple categories of victim and perpetrator. The butterfly mark that had once branded children for sale was now studied by anthropologists and sociologists as a symbol of humanity's capacity for both cruelty and transformation. Academic papers explored how the trafficking network's symbol had been reclaimed and repurposed by survivors, becoming a marker of resilience rather than ownership. Universities began offering courses in transformative justice, using the Mitchell case as a central study in how communities could turn tragedy into triumph. The Mitchells' home garden expanded into a community healing space, with neighbors donating adjacent lots to create a sprawling butterfly sanctuary. The space became a living laboratory where trauma survivors could work with plants and insects, finding healing in the natural cycles of transformation. Master gardeners worked alongside therapists to develop horticultural healing programs that were replicated at trauma centers worldwide. Michael's artistic practice deepened to include work with traumatized children, teaching them to express their experiences through art. He developed a technique he called butterfly mapping, where survivors could trace their journeys of healing through collaborative art pieces. These maps became powerful tools for understanding the geography of recovery, showing how individual healing journeys connected to create larger patterns of community transformation. Tommy's gift for sensing others' distress evolved into a sophisticated system for training caregivers and first responders. He could articulate the subtle cues he had unconsciously recognized as a child, teaching others to notice the small signs that might indicate someone in danger. His training programs became mandatory for child protection workers worldwide, creating a network of professionally trained intuitive observers. The warehouse site's memorial garden attracted visitors from around the world, each bringing stories of transformation and hope. The butterfly sculptures created by survivors were regularly updated, with new pieces added as more stories of rescue and recovery emerged. The space became a living archive of healing, where each butterfly carried the weight of history while pointing toward future possibility. Sarah's research into trauma and resilience expanded to include studies of collective healing, how communities could transform their wounds into sources of strength. She documented cases where entire neighborhoods had shifted their culture after participating in butterfly marking ceremonies, becoming more alert to signs of trafficking and more supportive of survivors in their midst. The ripple effects of that cold morning continued to spread, touching lives in ways the Mitchells could never have imagined. Their story became woven into the fabric of countless other stories, creating a tapestry of healing that stretched across continents. The butterfly mark that had once signified ownership had become a symbol of freedom, its wings carrying messages of hope to those still waiting to be found. In the quiet moments of evening, when the garden filled with the flutter of wings and the murmur of healing voices, the Mitchells would often gather to watch the sun set. They had learned that transformation was not a single moment, but a continuous process, that healing was not a destination, but a journey shared with others. Their story had become part of something larger than themselves, a movement of hope that continued to grow, one butterfly mark at a time.